Welcome, Dr. James Beckett, Sports Card Insights, the second part of my conversation with Darin Ostrom, sports card professor. Really enjoyed it. Thanks sponsors, Beckett Media, Beckett Grading, Beckett Authentication, ComC.com, Burbank Sports Cards, Mike Stadium Sports Cards, Heritage Auctions, Hugs and Scott Auctions, Tops, Upper Deck, and Panini. So here it is, and thanks again, Darin.
I remember there was a big story in 1990 about Pro Set having their own card manufacturing facility. Does that mean the Topps, Fleer, and Donruss didn't print their own cards? Upper Deck? Or did they have those printed for them? Was Pro Set that unusual in having their own manufacturing facility?
That was a function of Lud, Denny, and probably the NFL more so than hockey, but they were mainly football and hockey in those days, some non-sports, some other things they did. They took outside jobs, but they were doing hundreds of millions of cards, Darin.
Yeah.
They were keeping it busy, and I think it was a leveraged, not acquisition, but I don't think any Topps cards were produced there. Pro Set just all of a sudden got born and became an unruly teenager within 1 year. Just unbelievable. And that was the ethos of the founder. He was rolling in money for a while, but then he got too far ahead. But to diversify and to control the printing, because otherwise we wouldn't have had these living set kind of things, which was another important aspect of the hobby in those days, all the errors, but corrected errors and corrected accurately and arcane things. So Lud was a visionary and it had people coming back, but most of what he was selling was on consignment. He got so many orders out there, especially at mass retail. All of a sudden, when they started coming back, then he had a big problem. Then he was moving things around. Yeah, their printing press was their own. I think that was their own thing. Because I'm not sure the other manufacturers liked Lud. Brash and very boisterous for him to go in hat in hand and say, hey, we need some press time. We're printing up 1 billion football cards. They would have said, yeah, sure, where's your money? Or get in line. And I think, well, I'll just do my own printing press. And he probably borrowed money, collateralized by the machinery and by his 1 year of financials, whatever, but it just looked like he was going to the moon.
Yeah, I know he did print 1990 NBA hoops.
Then he competitively bid that. But there was need when basketball and football and hockey were coming on strong like that. Press capacity was not enough. Football was 89 for our magazine. Basketball was 90. Hockey was early 91, I think. That isn't an accident. That's when those current year products were just selling outrageously. They were moving up to baseball because this was before the baseball strike, but these were some of the golden years for card shops when you had maximum card shops. 90 hoops was hugely produced, and these card companies needed places to print because that was fresh demand compared to a few years before, when you're mainly doing baseball and football was mainly Topps, a little bit of Fleer, which was very low production quantities comparatively. In fact, the bottleneck, what did Fanatics do immediately? Acquire one of the huge card production facilities because the printing, inserting accurately, precisely, trimming and cutting, it's very complicated.
If Lud Denny had kept Pro Set going, I would love to have seen how he evolved his facility through the mid-decade because cards changed so radically with foil and acetate and all of those effects that I assume are all parsed out to specific little manufacturing companies, how much he would try to evolve the operation to handle all those changes. That would have been exciting to see.
He was a wildcatter, not risk averse in the least. He would have been either acquiring or imitating or getting out ahead. He had very sharp people working for him various times. So I think he would have been out there. The problem was he wasn't an accountant. He only looked at the top line, but it wasn't a true top line. It was the potential top line that I'm producing all these millions, maybe billions of cards. The total value of that is X, but you have to sell them and they have to stay sold. Initially sold isn't really sold, and then they came back, and then he was underwater, and then all of a sudden his charming personality, which he could be a real charmer, doesn't play as well when you're in debt and you've made lots of promises and it doesn't look like you're going to be able to fulfill those.
He certainly changed the hobby with 1990 Pro Set. I consider that the second most important card in terms of the development of cards themselves after only 88 score. I've always been a big fan of that set. I wish he could have turned the corner in 1992.
He had creditors that weren't going to cut him slack. He just was an overpromiser. And early on, he was over-delivering. But when he became an overpromiser and under-delivering and really unable to deliver, you could see that his strategy just killed the golden goose. But I would put 89 Upper Deck up there with 88 score, 89 Upper Deck, and then the 90 Pro Set. Upper Deck, absolutely pivotal game changer.
I see that changing the collectors, but not the cards themselves, because I didn't see anything follow 89 Upper Deck as an imitator.
There wouldn't have been any 93 finest without Upper Deck. Upper Deck doubled the price of the pack.
Yep.
The hologram, you're not giving enough credit for. There was a lot of concern. The hologram was a big deal. It became not as big a deal. And the foil wrapping was a big deal. Richard, I'm not going to put him on Mount Rushmore, but Richard McWilliam was a visionary in many respects. Like we're saying about inserts and parallels, is that for the most part, Upper Deck in the 90s did not fall into the same trouble that Fleer, especially Fleer, fell into, because their insert sets for Upper Deck were more achievable. The collector could see, hey, you're not taking advantage of my passion by giving me impossible chases. So Upper Deck had some sensitivity to that, because I think for Fleer, people threw up their hands and say, these are impossible. I've never even seen them. We had guys, East Coast, West Coast, Midwest, all those years, every weekend. There weren't even that many sightings of greens or reds of the PMGs. They just were head's teeth. And 86, if history had been different, we could be talking about sport flicks, but it's a footnote. It never really caught on. It was a technology that people weren't asking for.
It didn't have a clear design on it.
I'm just saying, here's my card. Hey, quit moving. I can't see. Which player is it?
If Upper Deck didn't launch in 89, we'd be talking about Action Packed, because Sport Flicks was more expensive than an Upper Deck card. Action Packed was more expensive than an Upper Deck card. But Upper Deck hit that sweet spot where it did everything just right, that the hobby actually did register with it. It made sense, and it caught fire.
Sport Flicks, I think, was like a test issue. Some of the same people that were involved with that were Score.
It's the same company. And in fact, if you look at
that was their test case.
In a way, yeah.
So do this, because that won't be disruptive to Topps and the other licensors that we have where everything's going fine. Give that a try. I don't think it went great. But then I think the Score guys that I know just showed up at Major League Baseball headquarters and said, hey, we're ready for a license. And here's our blood. Denny said, here's my $1 million check. Give us a chance.
So that's a big question for me. In baseball, there was Topps, Fleer, Don Russ, and then Sport Flicks opened the door for Score. So that's a fourth company. And then there's Upper Deck, and that was it. Action Packed wasn't allowed in. Pro Set wasn't allowed in. Whereas in football, they were so desperate, they just opened the door to anybody.
It's not fair. What is fair is that football length of career is so much shorter that the Players Association was unable or unwilling to turn that off. When people were coming up and throwing money at them, when the average player had a 3-year career, the powers that be within the Players Association, we have to take this money. But also Pacific, my buddy Mike Cramer, been friends with him for 50 years, and he was a visionary as well. He could not get a baseball license.
He earned his way up through making Spanish language cards.
Spanish, exactly. So I'm just saying, he knocked on their door a whole bunch. He could get in with football. He could show that he could do it, even though they didn't like the fact that he did most of it on his own. He was a Renaissance man, self-made, not formally educated, but just really smart. So then after he did the Spanish, then they let him in. But it was probably too little too late at that point, because all of a sudden now you got the baseball strike.
So was it the Players Associations in the leagues that were holding back more companies joining in?
For baseball?
And basketball?
Basketball had a different deal than baseball, but baseball was just always the market leader. The Baseball Players Association, Don Fear and Judy Heater, who was the licensing person, I just think they were willing to have the status quo with the licensors that they knew. And to bring in a new one would have been maybe disruptive. They were really focusing on boosting up baseball player salaries, which was really going up in that time. So the royalties, there was money there. In fact, the strike fund they had came out of their royalties that they'd reserved. Basketball was more cooperative between the leagues and the players. They had a different kind of resolution handshake for that. But football was where the animosity was because of the length of the careers. Whereas baseball could say, hey, let's just get more money out of the current. Everything's fine. Football was saying, hey, we're going to let them in. They got up to 13 licensors.
14.
14, okay.
All World and Game Day in 1992.
Here's me with our poor magazine, our print product that had to put them all in there.
Was Game Day a creation of the NFL?
I think they had a stake in it. There were their own approved photos.
They existed for 1 year and then they became a cart Fleer. And I've never found any reference to the company that started it.
I think it was basically Game Day was the name of the programs.
Yeah.
I don't know if they kicked it off, but at one point they had some card inserts in the programs. I think it was just an extension of the brand. Maybe after a year, they said, you know what? This is a different business. If we're going to print a bunch of cards, let's get somebody doing it. That's what they do. And I think fanatics will find that out as they're having close relationships with the players. What they've done is said, hey, players, let us do our stuff. We're going to give you a cut of the profits. And if you'll cooperate with us at certain strategic times, it'll go well for the whole category. So they've got the players on board to let them do what they do. I'm hopeful it works out well for a long time.
Along the lines of Topps and its evolution, in the 70s, it looks like the only sport where they paid the league license was in baseball. They didn't pay NFL license, so they had to airbrush. I think basketball and hockey was the same.
Are you talking about Topps?
Topps, yeah. In the 70s?
They had individual player contracts. When you look back, and even now, there's some reluctance to pursue some of those licensing claims toward full resolution judicially, because the strength of the patent or trademark or copyright may not be as much as they think. And Topps, there's also legal doctrines of you can't pull the rug out from under us and say that all of a sudden now you're going to start charging. So they were grandfathered in, I think. And so as long as they just kept the status quo, but then all of a sudden when you had these other competitors, it was like, okay, now Topps would have been at a competitive disadvantage.
Right. Yeah. Fleer was already making football cards in the 70s, but they just didn't list the name of the players. Yeah, so they're halfway there.
Yeah, but that's less than half.
I know.
It's very frustrating to the properties people that if it's just the player as opposed to just the team, people collect more players. You still collect teams. You're talking about these landmark things. 81, when the floodgates were open for Donruss and Fleer to come in, was an earthquake. I think it woke Topps up. And then somewhere in there, they just said, we need an agreement with the properties and get the team marks because it's competitive. But Topps' real advantage was that they could sign people before they played. That Cy Berger, in his brilliance, could go down to spring training and say, that looks like a good prospect. I'm going to sign him up for a toaster or a washing machine or something. And they're going to give us rights for the next 5 years. At some point, it wasn't exclusive, but they could do pre-rookies. And nobody else really could because they did not do individual things, Donruss and Fleer. They did league-wide. We're getting the whole union. But you're not a member of the union unless you have played.
I really like that you guys did the Future Stars, at least magazines. Did you ever do an annual for the Future Stars?
No, but most of those sets were in one of the various annual price guides.
Most of them, but not all of them. It's one of the things that frustrates me as I'm doing my own project. I'm having such a tough time navigating all the crazy stuff they did.
For example, because some of them were quasi-legitimate, Darin.
Yeah, Scoreboard. Cool.
No, they're not down on Scoreboard. They had relationships with players that allowed them to do some things that were below the line, above the line, whatever. We never put them in the monthly magazines, much to Ken's chagrin and his dad's. But still, I like those guys, but they had a different business model.
So for Star Picks, Front Row, Classic, and Superior Picks
They
and
were all in the
Signatures.
annual books.
Most of them are, not all of them.
Well,
Because
name one that wasn't.
what? Individual sets, especially when you get into signature rookies. There's some stuff I can't find in any of the annuals. But again, it's the complexity of the sets. I'm just saying it's a quirky environment.
I'm recoiling because my attempt, because I was very active in those days, was to include all that stuff. The problem was signature rookies, which was one of the names they went by. They came and visited us a few times, and basically they were loosey-goosey on what they put out. And so for us trying to do a catalog when it wasn't just a living set, they would just do different stuff. It was hard to get a handle on it.
So did card companies actually provide you with a map of the stuff that they created in
No.
the mid-90s?
We'd give them a map and say, this is what we see. Can you confirm? Occasionally they'd give us a checklist, but it wouldn't always be right. And Signature Rookies was one of the worst. And they were the nicest guys on the face of it, but it was just a marketing agency. And there were no controls on the number of autographs they did, huge numbers. And I don't know that they were certified or witnessed or something. It was in the days where anything went. To put it in a magazine, we weren't going to do that. Putting it in the book, we still needed to have some standard. So I guess in Darin, it just was unclear what their license was, because it certainly wasn't to the leagues. And the leagues run a tight ship and make you do that. And so there was no players association as much as just had they signed up.
College.
Yeah, college guys and other minor leaguers and things like that.
I think I'm going to track down a copy of each 97 and see where you guys were at with that and see how far that came. I can hopefully see if there's any information that might have trickled out of the magazine or out of the annual price guides.
On Signature
all those classic. There are a lot of things I find missing in the modern books. I don't know if they just disappeared because of space consumption or whatever. It's one of those archaeological projects.
The space was in our magazines or our books. Since that we ran out of space, we made choices. Shop at home was a big part of the problem. They did instant sets. In fact, they created things, I think, on the fly. Scoreboard, any of these home shopping network things where Don West was involved, they produced whatever they needed to produce. And they would do variations without telling us. And we said, what is this? It was really hard to reconstruct after the fact, Darin. I don't think there's any illegalities. And you're trying to be a historical record for the hobby. I was trying to do that. And it's really hard when people are not following what the established rules were. They weren't breaking laws, but they were taking liberties. Now to put the pieces back together, Darin, good luck. It's hard.
What do you remember about the Ben Coates rookie card? 1992 Pacific. He took off about 94, 95 out of nowhere. And there was only one rookie card of his. Because in my corner of the hobby, that was a big thing about how could a player have one rookie card in football? It just didn't make sense. I always felt it put Pacific on the map.
Pacific was really the main company that did stuff like that. Mike Cramer, being a collector, that's not the only instance where he scooped all the other companies and said, this guy's never had a card. Maybe he's a kicker, whatever. But they had the first and only card of a bunch of guys. That's probably the first example of that. But the other companies were not asleep at the switch, but he was a true collector. He'd work the sidelines with a camera for NFL games. He'd get a photographer credential and he'd go. So very savvy, very collector oriented. I don't remember that being that big a deal. It may have been more regional, but I do know they were the first ones to jump on Kurt Warner. I'm trying to think, was it Adam Vinatieri or?
Yeah, Vinatieri.
So I'm just doing it from memory, but there are some other notable ones. And maybe that's played out a little bit because it used to be those were secrets. And then if we put it in the magazine and we could track it, but some of them were just under the radar for a while, where they were quote unquote common cards of some of these obscure, popular, not a regional favorite, but a team favorite, a special teams person, a special teams kamikaze. They thought, let's get him a card. But Mike Cramer was the only one to do that. I don't know that the other ones just did it by the Players Association saying, here are the guys. I think Mike Cramer was saying, let's build a set. He was very hands-on. Here's the catch, Darin. For whatever reason, no other companies, whether it was Ben Coates or Vinatieri or Kurt Warner, none of them copied him. I don't know that they thought it was beneath them, but he was just that extra level of detail. He fabricated his own cards. He studied the rosters. So why didn't the others do it? And it's because he had less layers of management and he had passionate people working for him.
What I find funny is Bowman was trying to do that in baseball at the same time, getting that one player nobody else got. They turned that into a tradition in baseball.
No, it wasn't one. No, it was mass in baseball. It was Cy Berger from the earliest days of Topps, always trying to sign for very cheap. And all the guys they signed didn't necessarily come into the set.
I understand that, but I'm saying that in 1992, Bowman was reconfigured for baseball to cram a bunch of rare prospects in there that none of the other sets had. So in 1992, there was a new tradition that started in Bowman that you were describing with Mike over in football with Pacific. I was just surprised they didn't do the same thing with Bowman in football, what they were doing in baseball.
They had a different licensing situation. Baseball historically was signing players to individual contracts. At some point, they were doing player association. And what I was saying is that in 92, it wasn't just Mariano Rivera. It was a whole bunch of them, and they were people that they'd signed up. And they let her up. 91 Bowman, there's a bunch of them in there too. So Topps had a history of jumping the gun, putting people in sets that had not really appeared. That was a strategy, a shotgun. Mike Cramer was a rifle shot. He was a marksman. He didn't say, hey, here's the 10 guys. Here's the one guy. And if it was Ben Coates in 92, my point is that Mike Cramer looked at it as a passion project and Topps was doing it as a corporate strategy. That's editorializing and probably imparting motives unfairly.